Harvey Fuqua had known Etta James for years before the night he finally understood her. This is not as unusual as it sounds. The people who are closest to extraordinary artists are often the last to see them clearly. Proximity creates its own kind of blindness, a familiarity that replaces seeing with knowing, that substitutes a relationship's accumulated history for the fresh perception that a stranger brings to the same performer. You stop watching and start recognizing. You stop hearing and start anticipating. The performance that moves a stranger to stillness becomes, to the person who has seen it dozens of times, something they already know the shape of before it begins. Harvey Fuqua's relationship to Etta James was complicated, in the way that relationships between people in the music industry are complicated. Layered, personal, professional. The history of years of proximity without the clarity that distance sometimes provides. He had been a significant figure at Chess Records through his work with the Moonglows, had moved through the same world Etta moved through, had understood her position in that world from the inside, with the specific understanding of someone who occupied a position in the same industry, and had his own relationship to the label, to the circuit, to the particular demands of a career built inside what Chess Records was. He had seen her perform many times, from the wings, from backstage, from the corridor while he was doing something else and her sound came through the wall. The occasions on which he had watched her from the perspective of an audience, from a seat in the house, with the full expanse of the stage between him and her and the surrounding crowd to calibrate his experience against, were fewer than he would have predicted, fewer than the closeness of their shared world suggested. On the night in question, he was in the audience for reasons that had nothing to do with the performance itself. He was there in the capacity of someone who had business at the venue, or was accompanying someone, or had arrived early for something else. The specific logistics of that evening no longer matter and were never particularly important. What matters is that he was seated in the house when the lights went down, and that when the lights came back up, Etta James was on the stage. He had not been planning to watch. He had been close to her, closer than most people in the industry got to most people they worked alongside, and that closeness had given him many things: information, understanding of a kind, a relationship with the specifics of who she was that most people never had the chance to develop. What it had not given him was this: the view from the audience, the experience of being in a room when Etta James was on the stage and not knowing her, not having the history, not having anything between him and what she was doing except the air and the distance and whatever the performance was capable of crossing. He understood, sitting in that seat in the middle of the crowd, that he had been wrong about what he knew. Not wrong in a damaging way, not wrong about the important things, not wrong in ways that had cost either of them something they needed, but wrong in the specific way that proximity creates its own blindness. He had known Etta James from inside the relationship, and the inside of the relationship was real and true and had its own value. But it had shown him a version of her that was different from the version the stage revealed. The version the stage revealed was not a public persona, not a performance of something constructed for an audience. It was something more startling than that. It was the private person, fully visible in a public space. The qualities he knew from up close, the directness, the unwillingness to manage what she was feeling in favor of what was expected of her, the absolute refusal to substitute a safer version of herself for the real one, were on the stage, in front of everyone, doing the same thing they did in private except louder, amplified, directed at a room full of strangers who were receiving them as music. He had thought the stage was where she performed. He understood now that the stage was where she was most completely herself. There is a distinction there that sounds simple and is not. Most performers use the stage to do something, to deliver a show, to move an audience, to produce an effect that the performance has been designed to produce. The stage is a means to an end. What Etta James was doing was not that. The stage was not a means to anything. It was where the thing she always was had room to be itself without the ordinary social constraints that required it, in private life, to be somewhat smaller than its full size. Harvey Fuqua had thought he understood what she was doing when she performed. He had not. He had been close to her in a way that prevented him from seeing it from far enough away to understand what it was. And now, sitting in a theater seat surrounded by strangers who were responding to what the stage was sending them, he understood that what he had been close to, all those years, was something much larger than the version of it that proximity had allowed him to see. The first song she performed that night was one he had heard her perform before. He knew the arrangement, knew the tempo, knew the general shape of what she would do with it, or thought he did, which, in retrospect, was part of the problem. The accumulated knowledge of having heard something many times becomes a kind of overlay, a prediction that runs slightly ahead of what's actually happening, that tells you what you're about to hear before you hear it, and thereby prevents you from hearing it fully. From the wings, from the backstage, this overlay had always been present for Harvey Fuqua when he listened to Etta James. He carried his history with her into every encounter with her performance, and the history filtered what he heard and what he saw. And the filter was not a hostile one. It was not resentment or competition or any of the things that can make one person in the music industry hear another one badly. It was simply familiarity, the gentle deftness of knowing someone. From the audience, the overlay had nowhere to anchor. He was not in the wings. He was not in a corridor. He was not in any of the positions he had occupied when he watched her before, positions that came with their own relationship to the performance, their own frame. He was in a seat, surrounded by people who did not know her the way he knew her, who were receiving her without the overlay of personal history, who were hearing exactly what she was giving without anything between them and it. And because he was among those people, because the crowd around him was responding to what was actually on the stage rather than to what they expected or remembered, he began, despite the overlay, despite the years of familiarity, to hear what they were hearing. What they were hearing was extraordinary. Not extraordinary in the way that he had always known Etta James to be extraordinary, the professional acknowledgement, the informed recognition of someone who understood the craft and knew when it was being executed at a high level. Extraordinary in the way the person next to him was experiencing it, who had no frame and no history and was simply receiving what the stage was sending into the room, who was leaning forward slightly, as people lean forward when something has reached them, who was, by the second song, somewhere other than where they had been when the lights went down. Harvey Fuqua looked at the stage. He looked at it the way the person next to him was looking at it, without the overlay, without the history, with the attention of someone who was seeing something for the first time. And for the first time in all the years he had known Etta James, and all the times he had been in a building while she was performing, he understood what he was watching. He was watching someone who had found a way to be completely herself in front of a room full of strangers, not performing herself, not representing herself, actually being herself in the public space of a stage With the full demands of a performance and an audience and a set of songs to get through, finding a way to remain exactly and entirely who she was, without the protective distance that most people required to survive that exposure. The show ended. The audience did what audiences do at the end of extraordinary performances. They gave back some portion of what they had been given, in the form of applause that was louder and more sustained than what the occasion technically required. Harvey Fuqua applauded with them. He went backstage afterward. This was not unusual. He had access, and he used it. And he found her in the way that people find each other in the organized chaos of a post-show backstage. He did not tell her immediately what he had understood from the audience. He wasn't certain, in the first minutes after the show, that he had the right words for it, or that she would receive the words in the way he meant them. They talked about the ordinary things, how the set had gone, the specific details of the evening, the practical conversation of people who share a world and have years of its texture to cover when they see each other. He was working toward something, and he wasn't yet sure how to arrive at it. He found the way in the middle of the conversation. He told her what he had seen from the audience, not as a compliment, not in the language of appreciation that the industry used for performers it admired, but as an account of what he had specifically seen and understood. He told her that the view from the house was different from any view he had had before. He told her that he had been watching her for years and had not, until tonight, understood what he was watching. Etta James listened. She was not a person who was easily flattered, who received praise with the open gratitude of someone surprised by it. She had been praised and criticized, and analyzed and categorized, and dismissed and acclaimed many times. And she had developed a specific relationship to all of these responses that was neither cynical nor naive, a settled assessment of what each type of attention was worth. But what Harvey Fuqua was saying was not praise. It was something else, a description, an account of what the distance had shown him, offered without the layer of flattery that would have made it easier to receive and less true. She received it the way she received things that were actually true, directly, without deflection, with the brief stillness of someone letting something land. She said she was glad he had been in the house. It was a small thing to say. It was also, for someone who had spent years being watched by people who were close to her and missed what was actually there, not a small thing at all. Someone she knew had sat in the audience, among the strangers, and seen what the strangers saw, had understood from that position what she was actually doing up there. Harvey Fuqua had known Etta James for years. That night, from a seat in the house, he finally saw her, and she knew he had seen her. And that, between them, was enough.